The neural monitor's incessant beeping echoed through the sterile medical suite, each pulse marking another heartbeat closer to the inevitable. Meridian Vex, once the most feared corporate titan in the Terran collective, lay motionless beneath a web of life support cables, his empire crumbling as fast as his failing organs. The nanobotic treatments have reached their limit, Dr. Caiaphas announced to the gathered family members, his scaled reptilian features betraying no emotion. I estimate perhaps 72 hours remaining. Meridian's daughter, Vespera, pressed her palm against the reinforced glass of the isolation chamber. There has to be something else. Credits are no object. We can afford any treatment in the galaxy. Some things transcend monetary value, the doctor replied, his serpentine tongue flicking nervously. Your father's cellular decay has accelerated beyond our current medical capabilities. The quantum plague he contracted on Nexus Prime has rewritten his DNA at the molecular level. The family stood in stunned silence. Vespera, her twin brother Axiom, and their younger sister Lyrics, three of the most powerful humans in known space, reduced to helpless observers as their patriarch faded away. That's when she appeared. The girl couldn't have been more than 16 standard years, with auburn hair that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light and eyes that held depths of ancient wisdom. She wore simple civilian clothes, a stark contrast to the expensive medical facility, and somehow had bypassed every security protocol in the building. Excuse me, she said softly, her voice carrying an odd harmonic quality that made everyone turn. I can cure him. Security drones immediately surrounded her, weapons powering up, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she gazed directly at Meridian through the glass, her expression filled with something that looked remarkably like compassion. That's impossible, Dr. Caiaphas hissed, his crest flaring with indignation. No known treatment exists for quantum plague. The molecular degradation is irreversible. The girl smiled, an expression both sad and knowing. You're thinking in terms of conventional medicine, but I'm not from here, not from this dimension, anyway. Where I come from, we've learned to work with forces your science hasn't discovered yet. Axiom stepped forward, his hand moving to his plasma sidearm. How did you get past our security? Who sent you? Nobody sent me, she replied calmly. I came because I felt his pain calling across the void. Your father's suffering creates ripples in the fabric of reality itself. Some of us are, sensitive to such disturbances. Vespera's eyes narrowed. You're claiming to be some kind of healer? That's the most ridiculous. 3 minutes and 17 seconds. The girl interrupted, looking directly at the life support monitors. That's how long his heart will stop beating if we don't act now. The quantum plague has reached his cardiac muscle. As if summoned by her words, the monitors erupted in a cacophony of alarms. Meridian's body convulsed, his back arching as electrical storms raced across his nervous system. Dr. Caiaphas and his medical team rushed into the chamber, their hands flying over emergency controls. The girl stepped closer to the glass, placing her palm against its surface. Where her skin touched, the transparent aluminum began to glow with the same ethereal light as her hair. I can save him, she whispered, her voice somehow audible over the chaos. But you have to trust me, and once I do this, everything you think you know about the universe will change forever. The cardiac monitor flatlined with a sustained, soul-crushing tone. Time seemed to crystallize around that moment of death. The medical team worked frantically, pumping stimulants directly into Meridian's heart, their movements taking on a dreamlike quality as the girl pressed both hands against the glass barrier. Stand back, she said, her voice carrying an authority that seemed to bypass rational thought. Even the alien medical staff found themselves stepping away from the isolation chamber. What happened next would be debated in scientific circles for generations to come. The girl's hands began to glow with an intensity that made the chamber's lighting seem dim by comparison. The light wasn't just visible, it was tangible, seeping through the molecular structure of the transparent aluminum as if it were mere air. Streams of luminous energy flowed from her palms, forming complex geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. Impossible, Dr. Kiffis breathed, his medical scanner registering energy readings that defied every known law of physics. The quantum field around her is rewriting local space-time. Vespera grabbed her brother's arm, her knuckles white with tension. What is she? The energy patterns reached Meridian's lifeless form, and something extraordinary began to happen. The quantum plague, which had been systematically destroying his cellular structure, started to reverse its effects. Damaged DNA strands knitted themselves back together, diseased organs began to regenerate, and the gray pallor of death slowly gave way to healthy coloration. But the true miracle wasn't just physical healing. It was the fundamental alteration of Meridian's quantum signature. The girl wasn't simply curing the plague. She was rewriting the very laws that allowed it to exist within his body. His neural activity is spiking, one of the medical technicians called out, staring at readouts that showed impossible patterns. Doctor, these brain scans, they're showing connections that shouldn't exist in human neurology. The girl's glow began to fade, but not before one final pulse of energy enveloped Meridian completely. His body rose several inches off the medical bed, suspended in a cocoon of shimmering light, before settling back down with supernatural gentleness. His eyes opened. They weren't the same eyes that had closed in death. Minutes before, these eyes held depths of knowledge that seemed to span centuries, and when they focused on the girl through the glass, recognition flickered across his features as if he was remembering something from a dream. Kelleth, he whispered, his voice carrying the same harmonic quality as hers. You came. The girl Kelleth smiled with profound relief. I told you I would find you, no matter how many lifetimes it took. The medical staff stood frozen, their instruments detecting energy readings that belonged in the heart of a star, not a hospital room. Meridian sat up slowly, his movements fluid and graceful in a way that suggested his body had been fundamentally transformed. Father Vespera's voice cracked with emotion. What? What did she do to you? Meridian turned to look at his children, and for the first time in years, his expression held genuine warmth instead of the cold calculation that had defined his business empire. She didn't change me, daughter. She reminded me who I really am. He stood, pulling away the medical cables with casual ease. The monitors that had been tracking his vital signs went silent, not because he was dead, but because his biological signatures had moved beyond their ability to measure. The quantum plague, Dr. Kiffis stammered, running diagnostic after diagnostic. It's not just gun, it's as if it never existed. His cellular structure has been completely rewritten at the subatomic level. Kelleth stepped back from the glass, her energy spent but her mission accomplished. The plague was never the real problem. It was just a symptom of his soul being separated from its true nature. Some healings require more than medicine, require remembering who you were before you forgot. Meridian walked to the chamber's entrance, which cycled open at his approach. The family reunion that followed was unlike anything they had experienced, not just because their father had been returned from death, but because the man who embraced them carried within him the accumulated wisdom of something far beyond human experience. We need to talk, he said, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in their bones. All of us. Because what Kelleth has awakened in me is just the beginning. The family gathered in Meridian's private study, a room that had witnessed countless corporate machinations and power plays. Now it felt different-charged with an energy that made the expensive furnishings seem trivial and small. Kelleth sat quietly in a corner, her presence somehow managing to dominate the space, despite her diminutive size. Before we begin, Meridian said, his transformed voice carrying weight that pressed against reality itself. You need to understand that everything you believe about our family's history is incomplete. He moved to the massive window overlooking the cityscape of New Geneva, where the lights of human civilization stretched to the horizon. Tell me, what do you know about the Vex family origins? Axiom frowned, his analytical mind struggling with the impossibility of what they'd witnessed. The corporate records trace our lineage back to the first terraforming expeditions. Great-grandfather Constantine founded Vex Industries during the second expansion. Those records are accurate, but they don't tell the whole story. Meridian turned back to face them, his eyes holding depths that seemed to contain galaxies. Constantine wasn't just a terraforming pioneer, he was a refugee. Vespera leaned forward, her political instincts sensing layers of deception. Refugee from what? From a war that most of human history has forgotten. Keleth spoke for the first time since entering the study. A war fought not just across space, but across dimensions. Your great-grandfather was one of the survivors of the Convergence Wars. Lyrics, who had remained silent throughout the crisis, finally found her voice. The Convergence Wars are mythology, fringe theories about parallel universes and interdimensional conflicts. Mythology, Meridian repeated, moving to an antique desk that had been in the family for generations. Like the mythology of a girl who can heal quantum plague with a touch. He activated a hidden scanner, and the desk's surface dissolved too, reveal a compartment containing artifacts that definitely weren't human in origin. Crystalline structures pulsed with their own inner light, and geometric devices that hurt to look at directly floated in stasis fields. These have been passed down through 5 generations of Vex family patriarchs, Meridian explained, his voice carrying new authority. Constantine saved them from the destruction of his original home, Earth, in a parallel dimension where humanity had achieved perfect harmony with forces that your science calls impossible. Dr. Kephis, who had been monitoring the room's energy, readings from the medical bay, entered with data tablets clutched in his scaled hands. The quantum signatures coming from this room are off the charts. Whatever those artifacts are, they're generating enough exotic matter to power a starship. Keleth rose from her chair, approaching the revealed artifacts with reverence. These are memory crystals. They contain the preserved consciousness of the dimensional guardians beings who dedicated their existence to protecting the barriers between realities. Guardians. Axiom's voice carried a note of skepticism. You're talking about some kind of interdimensional police force. More than that, Meridian said, his hand hovering over one of the crystals. They were the defenders of reality itself. When the barriers between dimensions began to weaken, entities from the spaces between worlds tried to invade stable realities. The Guardians were humanity's response volunteers who allowed their consciousness to be transformed, gaining the ability to manipulate the fundamental forces of existence. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Vespera was the first to voice what they were all thinking. You're saying that we're descendants of these Guardians? Not just descendants, Keleth corrected softly. The Guardian essence doesn't simply pass through bloodlines. It remains dormant until awakened by need. Meridian's near-death experience, combined with his genetic heritage, created the perfect conditions for reactivation. As if responding to her words, the artifacts began to glow more brightly. The memory crystals projected holographic images into the air scenes of cosmic battles fought between beings of pure energy, of entire dimensions being sealed away to prevent contamination, of humans who had evolved beyond the need for physical form. The quantum plague, Meridian continued, his voice taking on harmonics that seemed to come from the artifacts themselves, was never a random disease. It was a proba testing mechanism sent by entities from the Void Realm to identify potential Guardians. You mean Father was deliberately infected? Vespera's business instincts were kicking in, recognizing the pattern of a larger conspiracy. Not infected, Keleth corrected, chosen. The plague wasn't trying to kill him, it was trying to awaken him. But the process requires a conscious choice to accept the transformation. That's why I came. To help him remember what he really is. The crystals pulsed in unison, and suddenly the room was filled with a presence that dwarfed their individual consciousness. Ancient memories flooded through the space, memories of the first guardians, of the sacrifices made to preserve reality, of the eternal vigil against the forces that sought to unmake existence itself. The war never ended, Meridian said, his voice now carrying the weight of eons. It just moved to a different battlefield. And now, it's coming here. The holographic projections from the memory crystals painted a picture of cosmic horror that made the family's previous concerns seem laughably trivial. Scenes of entire solar systems being consumed by writhing darkness, of space itself being twisted into impossible geometries, of civilizations reduced to screaming mathematical equations. These incursions are happening throughout the galaxy, Meridian explained, his consciousness now fully integrated with the Guardian essence. What your governments call quantum storms and dimensional anomalies are actually breaches in the barriers between realities. Axiom studied the holographic data with the analytical precision that had made him a successful corporate strategist. According to these readings, the incursion rate has increased exponentially over the past 50 years. The government's been covering it up. Not covering it up, Kelleth corrected. They simply lack the conceptual framework to understand what they're seeing. To them, it's just exotic physics phenomena. They don't realize they're witnessing the systematic invasion of reality itself. Vespera activated her personal communicator, accessing the classified intelligence networks that came with her position in the Terran Senate. Cross-referencing these locations with missing ship reports and colony communication blackouts. By the void, the pattern is everywhere. Entire sectors going dark, and the Navy is classifying it as routine equipment failures. The void entities are patient, Meridian said, his transformed perception allowing him to see patterns across space-time itself. They probe, they test, they gradually weaken the barriers. But they're building toward something, a final convergence that will allow them to manifest fully in our reality. Lyrics, who had been unusually quiet throughout the revelations, finally spoke up. What happens when they succeed? The answer came, not from Meridian or Kelleth, but from the memory crystals themselves. The holographic display shifted, showing what appeared to be the last moments of a parallel Earth. The planet writhed, as its very matter was converted into something that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The screams of 8 billion human souls created a harmony that resonated across the quantum foam. Total reality collapse, Kelleth whispered. Every atom converted into a bridge between dimensions. Every consciousness becomes a conduit for void entities to enter stable reality. The universe itself becomes a feeding ground. Dr. Kephis, who had been monitoring the conversation from the medical bay, suddenly burst into the room. We have incoming ships, he announced, his scaled features flushed with alarm. 12 dreadnoughts just dropped out of hyperspace and are requesting immediate landing clearance. They're claiming authority under Terran emergency protocols. Government, Vespera asked, though her political instincts already knew the answer. No, Meridian said, his enhanced senses detecting the quantum signatures of the approaching vessels. These aren't government ships. There's something else entirely. The memory crystals pulsed with warning energy, and suddenly the room's windows showed the approaching fleet in perfect detail, despite the distance. The ships were wrong there. Hulls seemed to bend light in ways that suggested they existed partially outside normal space-time. Geometric patterns covered their surfaces, patterns that hurt to look at directly. Harold's Kelleth breathed, her face pale with recognition. The void entities have found us. Harold's, Axiom demanded, his hand moving instinctively to his sidearm. Humans, who have been converted, Meridian explained, his guardian consciousness accessing memories that spanned multiple lifetimes. They retain their intelligence and their memories, but their loyalty has been completely rewritten. They serve as advanced scouts, preparing the way for full incursion. The communicator in Vespera's hand crackled to life with an incoming message. The voice that emerged was human in cadence but carried harmonics that seemed to come from the spaces between atoms. Meridian Vex, the voice said, each word resonating with authority that pressed against their consciousness. We know what you have become. We know what you carry within you. Surrender the guardian essence, and your family will be permitted to serve in the new reality we are creating. Meridian stepped forward, his own voice carrying harmonics that pushed back against the herald's mental influence. I remember you, Torvenkind. You were a guardian once, before you chose to serve the void. I chose evolution, the herald replied. I chose to become something greater than human. The old barriers are failing, Meridian. The convergence is inevitable. Join us willingly, and you can help shape what comes next. The memory crystals flared with defensive energy, creating a barrier that prevented the herald's voice from penetrating further into their consciousness. But the damage was done. The family now understood that their father's transformation had painted a target on all of them. They're not just here for me, Meridian said, his enhanced perception reading the quantum signatures of the Herald fleet. They're here for all of you. Guardian essence can be inherited, but it can also be awakened through trauma or forced activation. Forced activation? Lyrics asked, though her expression suggested she already feared the answer. They're going to try to convert us, Axiom said, his strategic mind putting together the pieces. Turn us into more heralds. Unless we fight back, Vespera said, her political instincts transforming into something far more primal. Father, what can we do? Meridian looked at his children, his brilliant, capable children, who had inherited more than just his business. Acumen, in their eyes. He could see the same potential that had made their ancestor a guardian. The same potential that could either save reality or damn it. We awaken the others, he said simply. Every human carries the potential for guardian essence, but it takes conscious choice and extreme circumstances to activate it. Others? Keleth asked, her expression showing the first sign of hope since the Herald fleet had arrived. The plague? Meridian said, his consciousness expanding to encompass quantum patterns across the entire sector. It wasn't just targeting me. It was scanning the entire human population, identifying those with the strongest guardian potential. There are thousands of others who have been infected but not yet awakened. The communicator crackled again with the Herald's voice, but this time it carried a note of impatience. You have 1 hour to decide, Meridian. After that, we begin the forced conversions. Your family will be the first to be enlightened. As the Herald fleet moved into bombardment position, the memory crystals began to sing a harmony that reached across space to touch every human consciousness that carried the spark of guardian potential. The real war was about to begin. The first sign that something fundamental had changed in the galaxy came from the outer colonies. Across 17 different star systems, humans who had been dying from quantum plagues suddenly opened their eyes with the same ethereal glow that had marked Meridian's transformation. But these weren't random resurrections. Each awakening was preceded by a moment of impossible choice, a conscious decision to become something more than human. The cascade has begun, Keleth announced, her consciousness now linked to the Guardian network that was spontaneously forming across known space. 47 confirmed awakenings in the past 6 minutes. They're all connected now, a living network of consciousness that spans multiple dimensions. Meridian stood at the center of his study, the memory crystals orbiting around him in patterns that defied gravity. His awareness had expanded beyond individual consciousness to encompass the quantum foam itself, and what he saw there filled him with both hope and terror. The void entities know what we're doing, he said, his voice carrying harmonics that made the room's walls vibrate. They're accelerating their timeline, Full convergence in less than 12 hours. Outside, the Herald fleet had taken position around the planet, their ships forming geometric patterns that began to tear holes in local space-time. Through those holes, something vast and hungry was trying to push through into stable reality. Vespera, her political instincts now enhanced by emerging Guardian abilities, was coordinating with the newly awakened Guardians across the galaxy. The government fleets are trying to respond, but their weapons are useless against Herald ships. We're losing entire battle groups. Conventional weapons can't touch them, Axiom said, his strategic mind now operating on levels that incorporated probability mathematics and quantum theory. They exist partially outside our reality, but ... He paused, his consciousness touching the memory crystals and accessing knowledge that belonged to no human lineage. The Guardian weapons. They're not just tools, they're extensions of consciousness itself. Precisely, Meridian said, his hands moving in complex patterns that caused the room's atmosphere to shimmer with potential energy. But creating them requires sacrifice. We have to give up part of our humanity to wield the power necessary to fight the void. Lyrics, who had been silent throughout the crisis, finally spoke up. What kind of sacrifice? Keleth answered with the blunt honesty that came from experiencing the transformation herself. Mortality. Guardian consciousness exists across multiple dimensions simultaneously. We become immortal, but at the cost of ever being fully human. Again. The choice hung in the air like a physical weight. Through the windows, they could see the Herald ships beginning their bombardment of the planet's surface, their weapons converting matter into exotic states that existed in the spaces between dimensions. I'll do it, Vespera said without hesitation. If it means protecting humanity, I'll make the sacrifice. We all will, Axiom added, his analytical mind having calculated the probable outcomes of refusal. It's not really a choice, is it? Sir, the void or transcend humanity to fight it. There is another option, Keleth said softly, but it's never been attempted before. Instead of individual transformation, we could create a collective Guardian consciousness, a group mind that shares the power and the burden. Meridian's enhanced perception immediately grasped the implications. Dangerous. If we fail, we don't just lose our individual humanity. We lose the concept of individual consciousness entirely. We become a single entity, with no memory of what we once were. But if we succeed, Lyric said, her voice carrying new authority as her own Guardian. Potential began to awaken. We become something the void entities have never encountered before. A unified human consciousness with the power to rewrite reality itself. The memory crystals pulsed with ancient knowledge, showing them glimpses of the original Guardian's final battle. Individuals fighting valiantly against impossible odds. Their power formidable, but ultimately insufficient against the combined might of the void. The old Guardians failed because they fought as individuals, Meridian realized. But humanity's greatest strength has always been cooperation. Our ability to work together to achieve what no individual could accomplish alone. Through the quantum network, they could feel the other awakened Guardians across the galaxy reaching the same conclusion. One by one, human consciousness began to merge, creating something that was both individual and collective. Mortal and immortal, human and transcendent. The Herald fleet's bombardment intensified, but the energy weapons that should have devastated the planet's surface were instead being absorbed and redirected by the growing Guardian network. Humanity was learning to weaponize its own transformation. Convergence in 3 hours, Keleth announced, her consciousness now speaking for the collective. The void entities are preparing for full manifestation. If we're going to act, it has to be now. Meridian looked at his family, his children, who had inherited not just his business empire, but his cosmic responsibility. Are you ready to stop being human? We stopped being merely human the moment we chose to fight, Vespera replied. Now we become what humanity needs us to be. The memory crystals flared with brilliant light as the Vex family joined their consciousness to the growing Guardian collective. Around the galaxy, thousands of human minds merged while retaining their individual identity, a paradox that existed because they willed it to exist. The real battle was about to begin. But this time, humanity would fight not as individuals, but as a species united in purpose and power. The void entities had never faced anything like what humanity was becoming. The moment of collective awakening transformed the galaxy in ways that defied conventional understanding of consciousness and reality. What had begun as individual transformations in isolated medical facilities became a single, unified moment of transcendence that touched every human mind simultaneously. Meridian Vex was no longer just a dying millionaire. He was the focal point of humanity's evolution into something that existed across multiple dimensions simultaneously. His consciousness expanded to encompass not just his own transformed awareness, but the collective will of every human who had chosen transcendence over extinction. "We are," he said, his voice carrying the harmonics of thousands of awakened minds. "We are what we choose to be." The Herald fleet, which had been systematically converting Earth's matter into dimensional bridges, suddenly found themselves facing an opponent that operated on entirely different principles. The humans they had come to convert were no longer bound by the limitations of single-dimensional existence. "Impossible," the Herald commander transmitted, his voice carrying notes of confusion that penetrated the quantum foam. "Collective consciousness cannot maintain individual identity. Mathematics forbid it." "Your mathematics," Vespera replied, her individual voice speaking for the collective while retaining her personal identity. "Human mathematics operate on principles you've never encountered." The battle that followed was unlike anything in recorded history. The Heralds, with their ships that existed partially outside normal space-time, found themselves confronting weapons that were ideas made manifest. The collective human consciousness didn't just fight with energy and matter, it fought with concepts, with the fundamental principles that defined reality itself. Axiom, his strategic mind, now enhanced by the computational power of millions of linked consciousness, began to unweave the mathematical structures that allowed the Herald ships to exist. Where his attention focused, the enemy vessels found their exotic matter configurations becoming unstable, their partial existence in multiple dimensions, collapsing back into ordinary spacetime where they became vulnerable to conventional physics. "The void entities are withdrawing," Keleth announced, her consciousness tracking the larger patterns across dimensional space. "But they're not retreating, they're consolidating for something larger." Through the quantum network, the collective human consciousness could perceive the true scope of the void entity's invasion. Reality itself was being systematically undermined, not just in their galaxy, but across the entire universe. Billions of civilizations were being converted into dimensional bridges, their matter and consciousness consumed to fuel the void's expansion into stable reality. "We're not just fighting for humanity," Lyric said, her voice carrying the weight of universal responsibility. "We're fighting for the concept of individual consciousness itself." The memory crystals, which had been the catalyst for their transformation, began to resonate with harmonics that reached across the barriers between realities. They were communicating with the remnants of the original Guardian's consciousness that had been preserved in the spaces between dimensions, waiting for the moment when their sacrifice could finally serve its purpose. "The final convergence is beginning," Meridian announced, his awareness encompassing the entire galactic cluster. "The void entities are preparing to manifest their true forms. If they succeed, they'll convert the entire universe into a single, unified consciousness under their control. Then we deny them that victory," Vespera said simply. "We show them what unified consciousness really means when it's chosen freely rather than imposed by force." The collective human consciousness began to expand beyond the boundaries of their own galaxy. reaching out to touch other civilizations that were fighting their own battles against the void, not to convert them, but to offer them the same choice that humanity had made: transcendence or extinction. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Across the universe, billions of conscious beings made the same choice that humanity had made. They chose to become something more than what they were, not to serve the void, but to preserve the fundamental right of consciousness to exist freely. Convergence achieved, Keleth announced, her voice now speaking for not just humanity, but for every civilization that had chosen transcendence. But not the convergence the void entities wanted. This is convergence by choice, not by force. The final battle was brief but decisive. The void entities, creatures of pure consumption and conversion, found themselves facing a unified consciousness that operated on principles they couldn't comprehend. How do you convert beings who have already chosen to transcend their individual limitations while retaining their individual identity? How do you consume consciousness that exists across multiple dimensions simultaneously? The answer was simple: you don't. The void entities, faced with a form of consciousness that was both individual and collective, both mortal and immortal, both bounded and infinite, found their own mathematics breaking down. They had evolved to consume and convert, but they had never encountered consciousness that could exist as a paradox, unified yet individual, transcendent yet grounded in the principles of free will. In the end, they simply faded, not destroyed, but transformed by contact with consciousness that operated on principles of cooperation rather than consumption. The void entities became something new, not the destroyers of reality, but guardians of the spaces between realities, ensuring that the barriers between dimensions would never again be breached by forces seeking to impose unity through force. Meridian Vex, who had begun this journey as a dying millionaire, found himself at the center of a universe that had been fundamentally transformed. Humanity had not just survived, had become the template for what conscious evolution could achieve when guided by choice rather than compulsion. So what happens now? He asked, his consciousness encompassing both his individual identity and his role as humanity's first guardian. Now, Keleth replied, her smile carrying the warmth of a universe that had been saved, not by force, but by the simple act of choosing to become something better. We explore what it means to be truly free. The war was over. The real adventure was just beginning. EPLOGU. 1 year later. The girl, who had once appeared in a medical facility to save a dying millionaire, stood before the Universal Council of Consciousness, a governing body that included representatives from every civilization that had chosen transcendence during the Convergence War. The barriers between realities are stable, she reported, her voice carrying harmonics that spoke to consciousness across multiple dimensions. The void entities have successfully integrated into their new role as dimensional guardians. There have been no incursion attempts in the past 6 months. Meridian Vex, now serving as Earth's primary representative to the Council, smiled with satisfaction that encompassed not just his individual achievement, but humanity's collective triumph. And the new guardians, adapting well, Keleth replied. Consciousness that chooses its own evolution proves remarkably resilient. We've established guardian academies on 47 worlds, teaching the principles of transcendence through choice rather than force. The universe is safe, Vespera added, her political skills now applied to the governance of galactic civilization. But more importantly, it's free. In the end, that was what mattered most. Not just survival, but the preservation of the fundamental right of consciousness to exist freely, to choose its own path, to become something greater while remaining true to its essential nature. The dying millionaire had been saved, but in the process, the universe itself had been transformed into something worthy of salvation. And the girl who had made it all possible, she smiled, knowing that sometimes the greatest healing comes not from changing what is, but from helping others remember who they truly are.